This is an account of several experiences I had with DMT over a few days. This was my first time experimenting with DMT and I had read much about it before I tried. I have used LSD several times, shrooms, 4-ACO-DMT, DXM, lots of salvia divinorum, high-dose marijuana, 2-cene-boom and other various substances. Recently I had been looking for a spiritual experience. So many people talk and write of spiritual experiences on shrooms, LSD, and 4-ACO-DMT. I had never taken a high enough dose of LSD or shrooms to really break through past threshold to moderate effects. I decided to take a larger than normal dose of 4-ACO-DMT. I believe it was around 40 milligrams. I had a horrible experience. Overdosing on a substance is not the way to have a meaningful experience. I got a hold of about 230 milligrams of DMT and modified a medium-sized glass bat with an 1/8 of an inch hole. I pressed a ball of number 3 stainless steel into it and melted 40 milligrams of DMT into the mesh by slowly and briefly heating it with the heat from a lighter and not the flame itself. I took a single hit from the pipe and put it down because I wanted to see what the substance was like before I went for a breakthrough experience. I had an intense closed-eye experience of colors and such. The body buzz was intense like an inhalant high. I had no desire to hold my body up. I had the typical carrier wave that people report, a high-frequency buzz that got quite loud, but this was the only time I experienced that sensation. In fact, after my first dose the side effects seemed to grow less and less prevalent. The next day I had a babysitter help me in dosing. I melted a further 30 milligrams into the mesh, assuming about 20 milligrams was still in it. I now believe I was wrong and more was still in there, as I'll explain later. He helped me to take 3 large and slow hits from the pipe which I held for 5 to 10 seconds. I take a breath between hits because I do not wish to add oxygen deprivation to the experience. After the 3rd hit I was barely able to hand him the pipe and lay back before I absolutely blasted off into another world. The best way for me to describe it is, you are dreaming while awake. I've had fully immersive salvia experiences before, and this is much stronger. In this first experience, there were various psychedelic patterns and colors, and then I was in a dream world. There was a black man smiling and welcoming me, trying to reassure me that everything was okay and helping me into a doorway that was held open by a little girl. He seemed to be very human, but the girl seemed strange. It was over very quickly and all I could really remember was the doorway experience. Although I know much happened before then, I think it was merely color and light, and not interaction with DMT beings. Before I go on, I should explain some of my mindset. I do not believe in a religion. I do not disbelieve in a god, but I'm much more interested in metaphysics and discussions about reality than I am about ancient tribal religions. I am more interested in philosophy than deity. Although I was seeking a spiritual experience through substances, I never expected to have one. In fact I met a god character in a salvia experience but when I came out, I figured it was merely a figment of my imagination. She offered no solutions, she seemed angry? She didn't even offer any new questions. It was just a being that I perceived to be a deity while under a salvia trip. I have always looked at people who couldn't admit that they were on a substance and everything that was happening in their heads and not in another world with other beings. I still know that I was under the effects of a strong substance when I experienced the things I'm writing about now, but something has caused me to question the reality of the situation. Is this a drug or a doorway? Is DMT the gateway drug to enlightenment or psychosis? I know it has offered me no answers, but it has created many questions and ways to think about the questions than I had ever had before. To continue, after some time incorporating the experiences and talking about it and other things with my friend and babysitter, I took another dose about 1.5–2 hours after the first. This time I loaded 40 milligrams and turned on the song Bjork, Heirloom so my friend would not be bored for the few minutes I was under. I tried more carefully to hold the DMT in and take in as much as possible and on my second hit I actually exhaled a strong DMT cloud. Watching the flames as I took the 3rd hit, I started to hallucinate strongly and I laid back into another world once again. I launched. I felt the G-force that some people experience and before I knew it I had lost track of my entire body. I no longer breathed or felt my heart race. I experienced a presence which I later understood to be the black man and child by my right side. I now feel they were guiding me through the experience. I have a spirit guide and as I write this my eyes are tearing up. I was suddenly inside the kitchen area which I understand to be inside that storm door that I was led into in the first experience. The counter comes alive with color and bends up until it is flat in front of my vision. The colors break up into fractals. The being wants me to see that there was many dimensions to existence as these pieces turn and move around forward and back like colorful cards being swung around one another. Suddenly I am seeing into the other dimensions and not just seeing the countertop of color. Each little piece of the countertop is now a viewing glass where I can see what seems to be the same being in many different dimensions. I am viewing him from the side as he has his head down. This being is incredibly alien in nature, but I cannot describe it. I want to say he was gray, but the fractals of color flying around were distracting to the imagery. The being was doing something with his hands in front of him near his waist and had his head bowed to look, paying close attention. I now feel that this was work being done. Sewing the patchwork of the multiverse together. I got the impression that God is working as hard as he can just to keep what we call reality in place. If you can imagine the great force required for the Big Bang to happen, and if some consciousness created that, what amazing power they must have and what incredibly hard work it must be to keep this creation from crumbling apart and having to start over. The idea that intervention on his part is impossible without causing some incredibly bad effect. The beings looked up from their work very briefly and saw me, merely acknowledging my presence. Just then I leaned forward and said okay, finding my body and breath again. I tried to open my eyes and realized that I had prematurely stopped the experience. I knew that if I didn't start talking about it, I would forget, so I started kind of babbling. The words did not make very much sense, but in talking I was able to keep the experience in my foremind long enough for the drug's effects to leave so I could transplant the experiences from my subconscious into my conscious memory. I laid back down and watched the ceiling turn into prisms of light, churning and morphing before my eyes as I slowly came out of the dream state. Each time I dosed a strong dose, I feel fantastic afterwards. It feels like I took a fantastic afternoon nap after days of not getting enough sleep. I wake up more alive than ever. Stretching is amazing. After attempting to explain it to my friend, I was really unable. I didn't fully incorporate the experience until much later. That night I dosed again in candlelight, and by myself. Each time I dosed by myself, it wasn't a great experience. Each time I dosed at night, I experienced a baleful reality with potentially malevolent beings. This time I saw another black man, who seemed to have a crazed voodoo witch doctor vibe to him. He was smiling strongly, but I felt he was trying to lead me astray. I told myself that it was a chemical and it would be over soon. It was, thankfully. Then I had a fantastic color display for a little while. When I went to put the last 40 milligrams or so of DMT away, I spilled it onto the floor and lost it. The next day, I woke up in the absolute best mood I have ever been in my entire life. I mean absolute nirvana. I went to work and just felt absolutely blissful. When hearing Bjork, All Is Full of Love on the radio, I incorporated the experiences of the previous day. It occurred to me that this multidimensional being that I saw to be God, working to keep reality stitched together, was what I had seen, and that my spirit guide was the people taking me to see him. They were the ones in my side vision. I decided to see if there was any DMT left in the pipe, and sure enough, there was even visible DMT rehardened on the surface. It had been collecting quite a bit of content with every hit, I believe. I decided to watch 12 Monkeys, feeling the combination of insanity and intense visuals would be interesting. I wanted to try to use DMT casually. I had an absolutely profound experience, and that day I felt amazing. I also had some realizations that I would characterize as dangerous. Things like, it's not a big deal if I die. There is definitely something else going on, and this world is just an illusion. This is not to say that I felt suicidal in the very least. No way. I felt amazing, but I was considering getting some more DMT to take orally with the MAOI in order to have a longer experience, and worried that the cardiovascular effects of the extended experience would be dangerous. That was when I had the revelation that it wouldn't be so bad to die in a DMT experience. This is when I decided that this line of thinking was dangerous, and that I should be more careful. In fact, if this being is real and working so hard to keep the fabric of reality from imploding, it would be wrong of me to do something to prematurely end the experience that God is working tirelessly to make possible. Back to the final doses. Warning, this is where the graphic sexual content begins. I took a dose and do not remember the experience. I know I experienced the spirit guide in my peripheral vision. I took a break from the movie to masturbate. It is important to note that I had a lot to drink that day and had ignored one impulse to urinate. The feeling passed and I did not notice, as I was very comfortable in my chair. I took many small hits, getting threshold effects, slight open eye visuals, and enjoying the movie. What a great movie to watch under the effects of strong substances. I took another break to masturbate again. Now is the time for a little biology lesson. When a man has an orgasm, there is usually residue left in the penis. The first time I urinate afterwards is usually slightly uncomfortable and it passes quickly. If I masturbate twice without urinating, the effect is compounded. The twinge I feel that signals my conscience to make way to the restroom is accompanied by a stinging sensation. Unfortunately for me, this sensation happened right after I inhaled a second hit. I had put the lighter far under the screen and was inhaling the hot shaft of air coming up from the lighter. It was a strong effect, and right as I finished the second hit, my penis stung painfully and I realized that if I didn't go quick, I was going to pee all over the place. I ran into the bathroom, well under the effects of DMT, tripping motherfucking balls, and ended up making quite a mess of things before correctly aiming. I grabbed some tissue and attempted to clean up behind myself while I was standing there. After I did so, I leaned forward and closed my eyes for just a second and quickly slammed them back open. It occurred to me that I was halfway into a fairly strong DMT trip, naked, and standing near all sorts of very hard countertops, a toilet, and sheets of glass that would be no fun to shatter with my falling dream state shell. After I slammed my eyes open and leaned up a little, I laughed at the situation I was in. It was hilarious for a brief moment until my spirit guide showed up. I don't mean I felt his presence, but I saw him standing next to me, in my house, watching me pee and laugh hysterically. The child was hiding behind my bathroom door and sort of peering around the door at me. Things became very unfunny in very short order. I said transient psychosis, oh fuck this shit. I knew I was hallucinating and there was no one there, but I couldn't stop myself from checking behind the door. That brief moment of fear was absolutely mind-blowing. I pulled the still DMT-laden mesh from the pipe and destroyed it carefully, then threw away the cheap pipe and the mesh. I did not wish to attempt to clean this pipe. Typically I destroy my MJ pipes when I take a break from smoking pot. I just find it's easier to buy a $10 pipe on the off chance I decide to get some pot than to buy the expensive cleaner to clean it between uses. Not to mention I dislike the idea of having a dirty pipe laying around the house somewhere. So this is my story. I consumed roughly 180 milligrams of DMT in a couple days. I met God. I have a spirit guide. I finally had a meaningful spiritual experience on a substance. I feel that I have really accomplished something meaningful that religion never offered. I feel better now than ever. I am already contemplating getting more DMT, but it is clear to me now that this is truly a spirit molecule. It is not to be used casually, for me, and it is not to be used without a babysitter. Proper dosing is also a must, and I will be buying a vaporizing bulb type bowl if I get more DMT. I do not like messing with the steel mesh. It's too easy to burn and not good to inhale steel gases. I have found a drug of choice to replace my much less powerful taste for high-quality MJ. Thank you to the shaman for discovering DMT, and the chemists for making my experiences possible. And a big thanks to the multidimensional alien deity that is keeping this reality together for us to attempt to figure out. It was the first day of the new year and some friends and I had indulged in rather large amounts of MDMA the night before. I was at a friend's house all day recovering from the MDMA when I was offered to try some DMT. The DMT had been extracted from Mimosa hostilis and was white. My friend had taken the extra step using a freezer to obtain a more pure product. I was in a good mood, ready to try something off the wall for a change. We had eaten a large breakfast to help us recover from the night before, and I had taken about 30 milligrams of ginkgo biloba standardized extract, 100 milligrams of coenzyme Q10, and a multivitamin/mineral with breakfast. I have tried approximately 40 milligrams DMT once before in smokable form, but I had never snorted it. I was a little skeptical at first because I prefer the shorter duration of the smoked DMT experience. I knew that DMT could be very intense from my previous experience, and I felt more comfortable knowing that time is on my side in case things get too intense. However, we had no DMT pipe. I felt the omens calling me that day to do it. The first one was as we were just about to turn off the TV. Someone on TV said break though. The second omen was the weather outside. It was just perfect and beautiful. I knew that I needed to conquer my fears of the DMT, so I decided to do it this day, knowing that if I didn't, I would be disappointed at myself for letting fear get the best of me. My friend lined me up a fat line of 100 milligrams of white fluffy DMT extract after weighing it. It looked like a lot, about the size of a fat cocaine dagger. He put on some very chill drum and bass, not too fast, not too dark. It was light outside, but the lights in the room were turned off. The TV was off and everything was quiet except for the music. The music was like a continuous journey. You couldn't really tell where the tracks ended or began unless you were familiar with the CD. Just my friend, his girlfriend, and I were in the room, and I was given a CD case with the fat DMT line and a homemade tutor. I sniffed the whole line into my left nostril. It burned a little, but it wasn't too bad. I felt nothing for a couple of minutes and then began to see some mild visuals. Playful, entertaining visuals covered the ceiling of the room in green and yellow colors, if I remember correctly. I was at peace and had sort of forgotten that I had done DMT. Then a couple minutes later I was visited by many beings, too many to count or even acknowledge them all. Each of them would come and leave quick, and they kept coming. I felt it was just best to relax and watch the scene because it would have been too hard to make sense of it all. It was rather pleasant and at the same time a bit overwhelming. The beings seemed to be studying me, all of them interested in something different, but I was not afraid. No two beings were the same. This part of the experience seemed pretty brief. I think this was when I first left my body and was no longer aware of being in my friend's room. Then I found myself experiencing the creation of mankind. I sort of felt like Neo in the Matrix when he woke up with all of those tubes going into his body inside of the tub where humans were being made for energy sources, except there were no tubes and no machines or matter as we know it on Earth. I was covered in a thick pink jelly-like material and could not free myself. I was not yet ready to be released because I had not fully matured enough to survive on my own. The technology involved was very alien, not resembling anything like human technology. I had the feeling that our creators were selfish for creating us, but that it is still good to be alive as a human nonetheless. Why did I feel that our creation was out of selfishness at the time? I don't know, but maybe in some secret way, we were created to unknowingly serve our creators. Nonetheless, I felt that they were okay with us enjoying life to its fullest, but I don't think they cared if we didn't. I felt trapped there. I couldn't move anything except my jaw. It was too much for me to handle comfortably, and I waited patiently for this part of the experience to pass. I continued floating around in the three-dimensional DMT space without anything too significant happening when I was found by a very advanced extraterrestrial being. His kind liked humanity and they enjoyed helping humans evolve at a very fast rate. I could feel this being empowering me and showing me advanced things. He helped direct my awareness to different things, all of which were helpful to my evolution. Anytime my awareness shifted to something of no use, especially things that would enable fear, he would give me a nudge to not pay attention to it but to focus on the useful things that were good for me. He also could sense weaknesses in me as I brought them up from my consciousness and would help me overcome them. At the same time, this being was learning from his interaction with me. It was a positive experience. I learned that these beings existed among another type of beings and that they did not like each other, but instead of fighting, they just avoided one another in a respectful way, knowing that engaging in problems was a waste of time. They knew what they wanted and applied themselves fervently to related tasks. The next part of the experience was the most frightening. I experienced the return of Jesus Christ as it is written in the Bible. I am an atheist, but I still have some biblical/religious material in my subconscious mind from when I used to be Christian. This is what happened. Time stopped. The music I was listening to is very repetitive, so it can give one the sense that whatever is happening will happen for eternity when on powerful hallucinogens. I experienced Jesus returning and at first it was awesome. I felt that all of existence was connected to this one moment and that everyone knew that Jesus had returned. It was very intense and everyone surrendered themselves. At first I believed that we were all waking up in heaven, learning how to use our heavenly bodies, but then I sensed that something terrible was about to happen. That terrible thing was judgment. I began judging myself, thinking about all of my imperfections, and I realized that I was about to be sent to an eternity in hell. I cried and tried very hard to find some good in myself to latch onto, to show Jesus that although I didn't deserve heaven, I was not fit for hell. I felt what it would be like to have your entire family stripped from you for all eternity, to be left in a place of torment and suffering with others who are also in misery. It was very brutally intense, and I honestly believed that this was going to last forever. Finally that part passed and I began to open my eyes again. I could finally recognize the room that I was in and my two friends sitting there in total silence. I was relieved, but the experience was not yet over. I was finally aware of the existence of time and realized that the drug would eventually wear off. I began to move to the music harmoniously in repetitive motions like a slithering snake, as I lay in the same place on my friend's bed. It felt very nice, and I had the feeling like this was expected of me from my friends, like it was a normal thing to do on DMT. It just came naturally and I couldn't resist doing it. It was therapeutic. This continued through the music track that was playing. Then came this entity/demon or whatever that tried to possess me. It was coercing me to become its sex slave. It offered me great things for my surrender and threatened bad things for my refusal. A battle took place between me and this sexual demon. I refused to allow my existence to be in the hands of something that was against my own desires. It was an all-out battle and the victor would be in control of me for the rest of my life, maybe even for eternity. I fought to the death and it wasn't fun. But I was the victor. Then I began to fear that I was dying. I felt like I didn't deserve to live. I felt like I had been rejected by my friends and something was trying to make me believe that I didn't even love my family. I felt that I had been given too many chances at life and that this was it. I had made the last mistake and I had to pay for it. I tried hard to stay alive. I thought about all of the reasons why I should live, all of the things I could do to be more healthy. I began to breathe like a yogi or some spiritual master, imagining oxygen going throughout my entire body, especially into parts that needed it most. I rolled around on my friend's bed, stretching, breathing, rolling off of the bed, getting into different positions to aid the oxygen flow throughout my body, cracking my bones and meditating. This is something that I have been doing on shrooms for many years. It's an intuitive healing process that I love, and one of my favorite benefits of doing shrooms. It seems to be a gift of the tryptamines, at least for me, and I usually begin to do it towards the end of an experience. I remembered that no one has ever died from DMT and that helped me realize that I was just panicking a bit. I tried to relax as I awaited my return to baseline. Finally I was able to stand up, and I felt great. I felt like I had just peaked on an eighth of mushrooms, you know the feeling like you have just been born again with a clear mind, quick, wise, intuitive and powerful. I looked in the mirror and my pupils were still very large. I didn't really feel like I did MDMA the night before anymore and I had a very optimistic outlook on the new year. I am glad I conquered my fear of DMT and accepted the challenge. Even though this experience was very intense, at times pretty difficult, I am glad I did it and I may do it again when I feel up to it, but I think I will stick to smoking. The experience lasted too long for my liking. DMT is not a toy. It was not a fun experience, but I like the challenge of such things from time to time. The afterglow was great, and as more time goes by, I think about the experience a little more and realize how intense it really was. It's been 24 hours since the trip and my nose is finally feeling better. I believe I broke through this time. All in all, the trip lasted about an hour according to my friends. They said that they have never seen anyone trip so hard off of 100 milligrams insufflated dose. Why? Perhaps because of the MDMA the night before or the supplement combo I took earlier. Maybe I am sensitive to DMT, or I may have just had some things in my subconscious mind that enabled for a stronger, more demanding trip.
I have decided to write a trip report for reasons that are twofold. For one, I do wish to warn others of some of the complications I experienced on this drug. I have read many trip reports and done a lot of research, plus have personally experimented with it in the past, and I believe what happened to me is less common. Second, part of my reason for writing this is selfish. I desperately need a way to help integrate this experience to move forward with my life, and this is an attempt at doing just that. Background: I am a 33-year-old female who is quite experienced with psychedelics. I really enjoy marijuana, LSD, mushrooms, ketamine, MDMA, 2CB, combinations of the aforementioned substances, etc. Prior to the experience I am about to share, I had smoked DMT approximately 15 to 20 times, but usually out of a vape bin, which cuts me off before I can really get a blast-off dose, if you will. Some of those trips were really cool and some were scary, but never so frightening it turned me away from my pursuit of crystal DMT. I spent years looking for it, and 3 weeks ago, I finally found it. My husband and I bought a gram and partook in a few small trips, working up the courage to take that blast-off dose. The setup: 4 days ago, at approximately 1500, we decided it was time to try to travel to another dimension and meet these entities we keep hearing about. I invited 2 of our friends over, K and P. We used our rig to dab the DMT. P went first and blew her 40 milligram hit out immediately through her nose. Accordingly, she had a fun experience in which she was still able to communicate with us. K went next and did a smaller dose and came back 10 minutes later sharing about all the amazing visuals she had seen and love she had felt. My husband decided to go last, so, finally, the moment I had waited for, it was my turn. My husband got the rig ready and poured in 40 milligrams of Dimitri. I inhaled it all and laid back on the couch. Some dramatic song was playing, I cannot remember which. As I held in the smoke, I closed my eyes and began to see hazy, dull, colors and patterns. I thought to myself, this isn't really working, and let the smoke out. I started to say to my husband I needed more. Yeah right, but I couldn't get it out. What happened next is a bit of a blur, but this is my best recollection. The trip. All of a sudden bright neon elaborate patterns, spirals, and jester-like clown people filled my vision. I was already terrified and could not understand what was going on. It is difficult to find words in the English language to describe a true DMT trip, but this is the only way I can think to describe it. It felt like one of the jester creatures grabbed me from behind and then grabbed my upper lip, stretching and pulling it over my head, turning my face inside out. I found it difficult to breathe. At this point I was still laying down with my eyes closed. The jester, felt like a male to me for some reason, then slammed me face first into the couch and then pulled me back up and tore both my eyelids open, forcing me to take in the insane psychedelia before me. My husband and friends said at one point, I bolted up to a sitting position with my eyes wide open, darting rapidly around the room. I think this coincides with the feeling of having my eyes torn open and being forced to watch this horror unfold. The words I was hearing in my head were, "You think you can play with us, you little bitch?" I couldn't understand what was going on or what I had done to get treated like this. I don't even think I knew who I was, but I definitely knew something was horribly wrong. The next thing I remember is feeling like this jester had stuck jagged plastic down my throat and I was choking to death. Outwardly my husband and friends said I had started gagging, and this is when they became concerned. Looking back, I am sure the taste of plastic and the harshness of the smoke is what led to this feeling, but when you are that high you have zero ability to rationalize this. The gagging turned into me spitting all over the couch, and my husband said it looked like I was about to throw up. Instead of throwing up, I tried to stand up, according to my loved ones, who got me to sit back down, and began crying out, "Help, help, help, help," over and over. The jester continued to choke me and I felt like I was losing the battle. I started saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." Finally, the trip began to release its grip and I could hear voices that were familiar, but the most familiar voice I could finally hear was my own. I heard myself begging for help and asking how to breathe. My husband told me I even said, "Help me you guys," and he said that notified him that I was coming back because I had some concept that my loved ones were there. I slowly came out of it, and as I was coming back, that jester character was surrounded by beautiful colors and patterns, and he was kind of dancing and smiling and laughing, saying, "Come again little girl. We'll be waiting," and other eerie stuff like that. When I finally, completely came to, I saw 3 very scared people surrounding me, rubbing my back, telling me I was okay and I was safe. I had no idea why they were telling me this, and I turned to my husband and said, "What's going on, what's happening to me?" He replied, "Babe, you did DMT." I began to cry. The whole experience was only about 5 minutes, possibly less, which is short, even for DMT, I was later told. It felt like a lifetime. The aftermath. It is 4 days later. The trip is very difficult to remember visually, but the feelings are not. I can still feel that jagged plastic in my throat. I'm assuming I must have burned it or something. I still feel sick to my stomach. I still feel anxiety and fear. I had to leave work early the other day and begged my husband to leave work too because I was anxious and scared and felt like the only safe place for me in this world was with him. I sincerely feel traumatized. The main entity I saw was mean. He was maniacal, taunting, violent and aggressive. I feel like I am on the verge of a panic attack writing this out. My takeaways. When I started this, I said I wanted to warn others. And I don't mean about the intense hallucinations or entities. I have heard of horrible trips and I didn't know it was possible, even likely. I guess I didn't realize it could ever be that aggressive of a hallucination, but hey, it's DMT, anything can happen when you enter that realm. I was in that entity's world and it had its way with me. What I really want people to be mindful of is that DMT can be physically dangerous. I always heard things like, "You're so high you can't keep your eyes open and you can't move, you just lay there." Well, newsflash, I did both and I could have hurt myself trying to stand up like that if my friends and husband had not been there. I didn't read about people almost choking or throwing up on it until I started to research it after my experience, and even then there is not a lot of information on this side effect. Perhaps because it doesn't happen often, but it can happen. I would have a sitter. Someone who can help you get sit back down or throw up, safely. I won't ever touch this substance again, and I probably won't consume any form of psychedelic until I am able to integrate this experience.
I was foolish. I just acquired some DMT and was impatient to try it. I didn't know for sure the purity of the substance I had acquired, and instead of properly weighing a dose, I found I didn't have sensitive enough scales. I just tried to eyeball it. I was at home in my apartment, a safe and comfortable setting, but I had had a difficult week, was tired and not in the most positive frame of mind. I really should have waited until another time. I really should have known better. I took the DMT by sandwiching it between 2 layers of dried mint leaves in the bowl of a glass bong. Filling the bong with smoke and taking it in one single hit, which I held in as long as I was able to. I've read the following back to myself a couple of times, and it doesn't really come close to describing what this experience was actually like, or how utterly overwhelming the feelings or terror and dread were. There are huge bits missing because I just don't know how to describe them, or quite where they fit in. But it's the best I can do. I lay back on my couch, waiting for something to happen. For a moment I thought I had failed to get a strong enough dose to experience anything, but very shortly I felt a warm glowy feeling and started to perceive some interesting fractal-type visuals. However, I was still very much in what I normally think of as reality at this point. Just as I began to think that this was as far as this experience would go, things changed suddenly and drastically. First, I felt my body instantaneously and completely disintegrate into an unknowable number of infinitesimally small particles. Then the walls of the room I was in rapidly expanded and blasted away. I knew I had broken through. I felt excited, happy and euphoric. This did not last. As the walls of my room vanished away, I caught a glimpse of and was briefly inside of a vast purple-colored dome-like structure covered in fractal patterns. It felt like a beautiful and safe, if somewhat overwhelming, place to be. For some reason I tried to speak. I don't recall what I wanted to say, but remember saying cup, and being confused that this was not the word I intended, and I was instantly ripped away from it. Looking back, there was a clear sense that my being torn away was a direct result of my attempting to speak, although I didn't acknowledge this at the time. I'm not able to clearly recall what the place I found myself in after that was like. I remember very briefly seeing the wall of my room again before a vertical white plane covered with a regular pattern of clearly defined black dots slammed across in front of it, from one side, then from the other side, and then closed in on me. What little visual experience I had after that was incomprehensible and indescribable. I remember seeing the dot planes a few more times, and know that I experienced other things in between seeing those, but I am unable to recall those things in any meaningful way. Throughout all of this there was an overwhelmingly loud sound which continually got louder. I remember experiencing complete terror, and feeling that this was not at all the right place for me to be, that something was very, very wrong, and that I had made an awful mistake in taking this journey. I believed, with no doubt at all, that I had died. I remember feeling that there was some kind of consciousness or entity in that place, although I never saw it, which it seemed had pulled me there and wished to keep me there. It wasn't exactly malevolent, but it seemed to be enjoying or benefiting from my fear in some way. At this point I began to quickly forget how I had come to this place, then who I was, then what concepts like who I and where even were, until I no longer existed. The thing that used to be me kept trying to speak, although it had no concept of what speech or language were or what it was trying to do or why. The other entity in this place seemed to be trying to devour and subsume the non-me into itself. At this point I remember non-me feeling only two things: complete, dreadful, all-consuming terror, and a desperate desire to grasp hold of some kind of idea of what I now know as, but was completely alien at the time, self. For what was an unknowable amount of time, at once seeming like mere moments and at once an eternity, non-me struggled to grab a hold of an idea it did not understand. This was inscrutably difficult. Initially non-me couldn't even conceive of what an idea was, never mind develop a specific one. But eventually, after what felt like an eternity of desperate mental grasping, non-me was finally able with great effort to say a single word. I. I don't know how many times non-me said this before progressing to I am, but it seemed uncountably huge. I am. This went on for a long, long while, my sense of self slowly returning. The entity, if there was such a thing, did not seem to wish me to leave, but also no longer appeared interested in trying to stop me. A rectangle appeared, and resolved into a calendar on my wall. Other familiar objects in my apartment resolved themselves one by one. I felt my body again. There were walls. A door. I was on a couch. However, everything was still distorted and I still did not know who or what I was. I am apostrophe dot 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 I am apostrophe dot 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 went on for some time until suddenly the epiphany came and I recalled my name. I am A. J. I am A. J. I was instantly back in reality, and realized that I was triumphantly screaming this out as loud as I possibly could. I felt confused and bewildered for some time after that. Eventually I got up to look at my clock. It took me a while to recall what time was or meant, but once I did I could tell that this experience had taken roughly 15 minutes. It had felt like eternity. The effects didn't fully wear off for another half hour, my vision being distorted and my thoughts disjointed, but mainly being I'm never fucking doing that again. I felt confused and anxious for hours afterwards and barely slept that night. Ultimately though, despite being horrible and not something I wish to repeat, I think this has been a positive experience. The main thing I have taken from this is a very strong sense of my own mortality, and of how unaware I was of it before, despite thinking otherwise, and also a renewed feeling of how fortunate I am to have this existence, of who I am and of how glad I am to be who I am. I've been taught a hard, harsh lesson and already have a strong sense that I will grow from it. I can't categorically say that this will be my last visit to hyperspace. I'm deeply intrigued by the dome place I briefly saw before being taken away to, whatever that was. But I think that it will be a great many years before I feel mentally grounded enough to venture there safely, if I ever do. While I'm glad of what I experienced last night, I do not ever want to go to that place again.
I've tried most common psychedelics extensively over the last 15 years, and would consider myself an experienced psychonaut, but while I'd always been interested, I didn't have the opportunity until recently to try DMT. I bought a glass pipe at a head shop with a tiny bowl and a squiggle in the stem, similar the drawing in Gracie and Zarakov's article. Before smoking, I spent part of the day watching videos about DMT and reading trip reports. I was a little concerned I was programming myself, and given the typicalness of my experience I think I did program myself a bit. For my first try, I filled it with about 40 milligrams of DMT, measured on a reasonably accurate scale. It took me a long time to get the DMT to melt, and on my first go I didn't really get a good hit. I was surprised to find it hardly tasted as bad as I'd been led to believe. I could really barely taste it except for my mouth going a bit numb. I think MDMA crystals taste 1,000 times worse. Later, when I got a better hit, the taste didn't bother me at all. It almost had a slightly perfumed anisette finish. After my first try, I felt just a tiny bit like I was coming down off of mushrooms for maybe 2 minutes. For a moment with my eyes closed I saw Alex Gray type human circulatory patterns and thought, oh no, I hope this isn't all Alex Gray style. I opened my eyes and my room was quite normal. My arms and chest felt heavy, and my stomach a bit woozy. It was pretty frustrating, so I waited about 10 minutes and then measured out a larger dose, 55 milligrams plus or minus 5 milligrams. This time I succeeded in getting it to vaporize much faster, but I didn't hold the first, biggest, lungful for very long, and it was only with the second lungful that I remembered to keep it in and I finally managed to take off. I closed my eyes and was immediately pitched into deep space. From a great distance tiny points of light started shooting towards me exactly like any space movie. More and more points of light appeared, and as one grew bigger and bigger I realized it was in the shape of a sitting Buddha. Although I was moving at 1,000 miles per hour, the Buddha was massive and massively slow. I passed through the Buddha, which was made of circuit patterns of light. I'm not normally into Buddhas, but this was a distinctly welcoming Buddha. This Buddha was then joined by 1,000 more Buddhas in a solid wall of sitting Buddhas that were flashing rainbow colors into infinity. I was playing a record of J.M. Jar's Oxygen, and the high-pitched beeps from the record were reflected in the flashing patterns on the Buddhas. I remembered very clearly an obelisk at the Metropolitan Museum of Art that has 1,000 rows of Buddhas carved into it. In one eye I was standing in front of the obelisk at the museum, in the other eye I was microscopic and passing through this obelisk at a tremendous speed. On the other side of the Buddhas, I was in a massive room carved with Egyptian hieroglyphics. I floated through this room at a slower pace. I passed in between and through hieroglyphics that were much larger than me. I was probably as tall as one of their fingers, or a nose. There were also pyramids that were dollhouse size to me. They were all moving and interacting with each other, but paying me no mind. There was an overall yellow cast to the light and the objects in this room. I floated through a stone doorway and the next wing was mostly orange with silver and white accents and was decorated in a very 1970s, modular, cellular style. This room was on the same scale as my body, all of the furniture was formed out of the same material as the walls, floor, ceiling, as if it had been cast as one piece. There was something labyrinthine about it, but also ultra-modern, not 1970s but 3070s. In this room was a woman with dark hair and fair skin and I would guess her late 40s. She was dressed in the same material as the room. She didn't speak to me directly, but she knew I was there and there was nothing threatening about her. At about the moment I became aware of the woman, I also realized that instead of flying forward, I was controlling my own movements. I started towards another door in the right corner of the 3070s room. It was also futuristic, but it was glowing silver with no orange. As I got to the room I only had a quick glance inside, silver and black mirrors, before I opened my eyes. I opened my eyes and my living room looked quite normal, with only a very slight weirdness to the lighting and enhanced colors. I tried to close my eyes again, but I found that I had slipped out of the vast museum complex and now I was back drifting through the stars, and seeing LSD-like patterns. They were pretty, but not nearly as exciting. Through the entire experience I was aware of heaviness on my body, and the slow, labored breathing everyone talks about. At a certain point I had to cough but I suppressed it because I had a feeling a cough would tear through the tissue paper of my vision. At no point did I lose my sense of self or awareness that I was sitting on the couch in the living room. I felt like Alice when her head shoots up suddenly from her neck and her body stays tiny on the ground. The physical effects wore off shortly after the mental effects disappeared. Less than 20 minutes later I ate dinner with no trouble, and my head felt clearer than it had before I smoked the DMT. In retrospect I think two things really influenced my trip. I did used to take LSD at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a lot, about 10 years ago. Recently I've been having a psychedelic renaissance, and I have been thinking about doing this again. Oddly, the Thousand Buddha wall there never really engaged me at the time, but I think that as soon as I made that connection to the star Buddhas in my vision, the rest of my experience took on a very med-tinged / museum-wide tone. The second influence was 2001 Space Odyssey, which I watched again recently, and I had been thinking about how DMT-like the last 10 minutes were. I think I definitely gave myself exactly what I was expecting as far as shooting beyond the infinite goes. Not that I'm complaining, it was awesome. I will definitely be looking to this more extensively in the near future. There was nothing ominous or too uncomfortable about this experience. I feel like I only just crossed the threshold, and I am ready to go further.
The following was written about 6 months after the experience from notes written the day after. Previous to this experience I had tried smoking unknown amounts out of various devices and my total experience of it was a hallucination of Escher-style lizards, interlocking and marching in a circle on the carpet and a disgusting body high. Since this experience I have been unable to find the courage to try another dose of this size, though a couple of much smaller trips have been relatively pleasant and successful. The day of the experience I had been smoking much good herb at my house with my friend Jay. I consider myself an experienced psychonaut, having tried something from every major group a couple times. Loaded approximately 40 to 50 milligrams, or so the scale said, of just off-white granular powder into toker-style water pipe. Began inhalation, immediate intense discomfort, the very basic oily smoke burned my lips and lungs, but I began to get off before finishing the first giant hit. I immediately feel a sense of correctness and an energy began to build in my body until I feel like I would explode. Simultaneously with the building pressure my visual perception changed, Colors grow brighter and each object begins to vibrate independently of all other objects, and a tinted film or membrane seemed to be laid over every object so that my field of vision was a patchwork of colors with brightly colored objects vibrating behind them. Because of the intensity and abrasiveness of the color and vibration, I closed my eyes and was immediately greeted with an object which I believe may be of the standard chrysanthemum pattern. It looked most like an anemone or a writhing mass of stylized worms or, oddly, pasta. In fact, my first thought was something like a psychedelic lunch, mostly in neon blue and black but often purple or green interiors. Once my eyes had closed, I began to feel a sense of motion pulling me slightly backward, down, and to my left. This feeling built in intensity for the few seconds that I gazed at the anemone/object until, with very little sense of change, the black background of the scene resolved into a totally real and internally consistent scene. With a visual feel somewhere between a cartoon and a very good animated film. This was my first experience with what I might describe as a visionary state. I was in a round room, the walls were a red and orange pattern that was constantly changing in some subtle hard to pinpoint way, but it was not any form of characters or language so often spoken about. I was seated at a square table which was just slightly to my right. In front of me, also seated at the table, was a being who, as the scene opened, was proffering me the anemone/object. I mentally referred to the beings as male throughout, although they wore no coverings, had no decorations, and all the beings I encountered looked the same to me, was humanoid though bright mahogany colored. The whole scene was in bright warm colors. He had reasonably human hands. His face, however, was very strange. Head roughly the size of and shape of a horse's. They had one or two roughly human eyes, but the bottom of the head was a mass of writhing or melting tentacles. If he had been more human-like, I would say these tentacles would be his mouth and nose, as they began below his eyes and hung to mid-chest. It was out of this tentacle mouth that the being was extruding the anemone/object/pasta in a manner that could be described as some combination of breathing, vomiting, or singing, though there was no sound until the end of the experience, wrapped into one easy action. He was catching this sung/breathe mass in both hands and proffering it to me. Stunned, it took me some time to take it into my hands. When I did accept it, the being turned away from me without a second thought. I wondered whether this was common for him, strange aliens turning up to receive his blessing, for I had recognized this as some sort of shamanistic/psychedelic ceremony, for when I looked around the table there were other beings like the first whom he had now turned his attention to and was repeating the process of blowing/singing objects into existence for each being. I was very confused by the fact that none of the beings at any point paid any attention to me. Imagine sitting down to smoke a bowl with some friends and the being I've described turns up in line for seconds. Would you hand it to him and continue your conversation? If so, you and the being have more aplomb than me. The more I thought about it, though, I wondered if I was simply occupying the body of one of the beings, as if our simultaneous psychedelic use had caused us to momentarily trade dimensions and bodies. I was immediately able to recognize the scene as a group of people getting high on psychedelics, and the whole thing had a distinctly tribal flavor. As each entity received his object, he began to breathe or drink it in a manner that did not diminish the object but did somehow fill him with its essence. I was too stupefied to do anything with the object but stare at it in the room, the perimeter of which was ringed with more of the beings pressed against the wall, clearly waiting their turn at the table. My odd examination of the object continued until I became aware that it was time to come down. This was achieved by means of a vibration I had been unaware of, but which had been present all along, Doppler down into auditory range, and in some way I rode this sound back to my body, where I was replaced as gently as a baby inside my body. I opened my eyes to the same intensity of vision I had previously left. I asked my friend Jay how long it had been, and he replied just a few minutes, a better time scale than that I can't provide, but subjectively it felt like a few minutes, possibly less time than it has taken to read this piece. As I told Jay about the experience, I had the certain knowledge that if he were to have taken a hit before I spoke about it, he would have visited the same scene. But alas, he did not, and the feeling faded with time.
After first hearing about this substance in 2011, I had long awaited my experience with DMT. I am 24 years old, female, and in good health, and do not use drugs. This was a relaxing afternoon off of work for me. I had just finished a half-hour yoga session with my brother, my sister, and my brother's girlfriend. When the meditation was concluded, my brother casually asked if anyone would like to smoke DMT. There was no doubt in my mind that I wanted to partake in this experience. I filled my water cup, went into his room, and waited on his bed, resting against the wall, while he packed a bowl. I wanted to smoke the DMT in my brother's room because it felt right. It is a relaxing basement bedroom with vibes of privacy and safety. I was going to be the only one smoking. I had not eaten anything that day, but my brother said that I would be fine. When he finished packing the bowl, there were probably 4 or 5 crystals that I would smoke. He explained to me that my journey would start even before I was finished inhaling. He suggested I did a few breathing exercises and that I notify him when I was ready to begin. After a few deep breaths with focus on expelling every bit of air from my lungs and then taking in new, I was ready. He held the bowl to my lips, and after an intense exhale, I would begin to take in the substance, which smells of burnt plastic, and my trip would begin almost immediately. I would say roughly 3 seconds into my inhale. It was harsh on my lungs, as I am not a smoker, and I was nervous that I could not keep in enough smoke to thoroughly trip. I was wrong. This thought was quickly replaced by buzzing as everything turned to cartoon-like imagery right before my eyes. In front of me was a yellow and white cartoon TV, but not a typical TV. Everything was buzzing, and immediately I began to fight the journey. Having no prior experience with psychedelics, I was afraid to let it take me. My brother told me, I repeated a few times, "This is too much, I don't want to do this, this is too much." Up to the right, there was a chalkboard with funny looking elementary style aliens that appeared to be drawn in ordinary sorts of chalk, following one another in their space vehicles. That would be the last time I would see the aliens, who I am certain were influenced by the verbal mention of aliens from my brother. My journey would now revolve around the happy Buddha, whose head I wear around my neck. I felt where he rests upon my upper chest because the area became intensely warm. Everything was colored in rainbow, and the guests in the room were coming in and out of the picture. I tugged at the necklace a few times because I felt that I needed to see his face. My sister removed the necklace from my neck so that I could hold him and look at him. It would be just he and me for a while. Time is greatly distorted where Earth minutes could be journey hours, now. I held his face in my hands, the way one would brace a face to demand attention or answers from a loved one. "Why do I love you?" I repeated to the Buddha, which I had asked him earlier in the day. And then it started, my journey would become an electronic dance party. Buddha's head grew larger and larger, all along retaining his smile, as the music grew louder and louder. My arms would expand with his growing head, and he would begin to sing to the electronic music, "You are me. You are me. You are me," over and over again. "I am you. I am you." I answered back. My hands were no longer there, nor was anything else that existed pre-journey. Buddha's head was surrounded by flashing lights and loud music, and our song, our mantra, filled my being. Eventually the music stopped and I was aware of those around me. Still rainbow and buzzing and composed of galactic sounds, my sister would tell me that my friend Tiffany got me that necklace. "This is me," I repeated several times, insinuating that the Buddha head and I are one. My brother began to beatbox, which I believe was the second time he had done this during my journey. I turned to look at him, and he was the most beautiful lizard I had ever seen. Covered in semi-transparent iridescent rainbow scales, his body moved with the fluidity of water. On his front was an intricate, fine-line tattoo, one that I had never seen before, and all of his other tattoos that he got on Earth had disappeared. As he beatboxed, his body moved in waves. His beatboxing seemed to be in slow motion, as did everything around him, and the way his body appeared to be moving was audible. It was deep, soothing vibrations. I felt my eyes becoming wider and wider at the beauty of him. I remember becoming aware of my eyes because I felt like they were wider than ever before. At some point, either before or after the show of my beatboxing lizard brother, I expressed multiple times that we are all robots, and my brother agreed, stating that this is nothing more than a computer. I felt the need to move robotically, correlating sound effects to match my moves. At some point, not only could I not walk normally, but also I couldn't talk because I was a robot. I had an idea that my brother and I would beatbox together, and that it would sound incredible. When the effects started to wear off, everybody was tinted yellow, their outlines buzzing like faulty electrical outlines. This was an amazing experience, and I feel no words could capture the depth of the journey, as I experienced extreme, and pleasurable, synthesis of the senses during the journey. It was a very audible experience for me, and I would definitely love to experience DMT again.
It's been a few weeks now since my first encounter with DMT, something long awaited and highly anticipated, but which completely transcended any expectations I had of it. I'd read a lot of McKenna's rants about self-transforming machine elves, the Amazon shamans helping spirits and ancestors, and friends had told me about gnomes in giant stack hats running around in a fully psychedelic playground. No matter how much I heard about the alien intelligence encounters, I kept putting them aside as interpretations that color and play off each other, like one person says they encountered aliens, and so the next person interprets their own trip in a similar way, which creates a chain of influence over every next tripper. However, I did expect something alien, something that I could recognize as alien, something sci-fi or fantastical, like a psychedelic Star Trek. I couldn't have been further from the fact of the matter. I was at a friend's house organizing some other drug-related circumstances. It came up that he had a bit of DMT left and asked me if I was interested in trying some. Absolutely not, so we got in the car and drove to a place he recommended tripping at, up in the hills in a national park, a 5-minute walk through scrub into a secluded forest area. During the walk we talked about the feeling of the place, noting that there was a distinct pagan ritual site feel about the area, a kind of overarching, all-seeing watchful presence about the environment. But it was peaceful, clear-skied, and fairly shady and cool. In retrospect, I'm sure this comfortable place influenced the quality of the DMT flash. I had 2 attempts about 15 minutes apart because the first was noticeably not a peak experience. But it was a good introduction to the totally alien nature of the DMT visions. Taking in the first toke, around 25 milligrams, I began to notice weird body sensations, my trunk became slightly elongated, and everything was surging with an energy that was totally silent to the ears but like a raging river in my mind. My heart felt like it was about to burst through my rib cage as I reached the peak of the inhalation. I let out a single laugh as I began to exhale, partly because the sensations were awesome, not unlike the body rushes of mushrooms, but I was mostly just ecstatic that DMT molecules were finally having their way with my mind. I closed my eyes and was immediately face to face with a supreme being of sorts. It had no face, and its form was like a string of multicolored lights constantly morphing, like a clown making a series of balloon animals. Beginning with a dog, he alters a couple of parts, holds it differently to reveal a dolphin, and so on. It was certainly a living presence, and without a face it was still somehow staring eye to eye with me as though it knew everything about my entire life. There was no sense of emotional attachment, but there was definite supralinguistic communication happening. This being and I were traveling at great speed through an infinite stretch of deep space. I was chasing it. It stayed the same distance away from me the whole time and seemed to be at ease with the speed, while I was struggling to keep up. It was as though it wanted me there, but not yet, not in this way. It was telling me to come back when I could keep up with it, when I could catch up and pass straight through it. Maybe this was the membrane that separates the being's world with mine, the chrysanthemum that McKenna described. The being zoomed away and the effects started to fade, leaving me in a blissful kind of luminescent state that surpassed any notion of Zen states or meditative bliss. The real world had become indescribably fresh and crystal clear while I had my eyes closed. 15 minutes later, and the second attempt was around twice the dose of the first, and began just the same. The visual environment became kind of fuzzy and my body seemed to spaghettify just slightly. But within seconds of this there was a distinct difference. I had only heard this described in other people's accounts once, I think, and I had totally forgotten about the possibility of it happening until it actually happened to me. Just after I released the toke, I looked around to see what was happening to my senses as I was coming up, when the entire universe began to buzz. It was like a deep bass feedback loop that you sometimes hear in electronic music, like the humming noise of flying saucers in movies, very electronic and computer-like, but unbelievably real and right there, all around me. I immediately thought that the DMT had unlocked a whole new realm of sound that we don't normally hear, a background kind of sound that would distract our ears from normal functioning, the sound that matter makes. I've perceived the vibrations of matter and subatomic particles on other trips, mushrooms, acid, and once or twice even on the old hooch, but now with DMT it was a totally audible reality. And more than just audible, this sharp bassy hum that was coming out of everything made everything vibrate, including myself and my sitter next to me. It was so intense and pervasive that I had to close my eyes to escape the motion sickness of this vibrating mass of existence. When I did, the buzz began to mutate and break up into all these telephonic/electronic modem-like noises, like a kaleidoscope of sound. The sounds built and built, reaching a peak that culminated in a vortex which sucked everything in existence, the buzzing, the environment around me, and my entire being into a totally foreign dimension, and there I was with total silence. The buzzing was gone, and I was in a room looking at a wall. The wall was like a complex scaffold of constantly morphing angular prisms shimmering with colors that are completely beyond the descriptions of any language, and totally awe-inspiring. I felt an uncontrollable smile grow across my face, reality check, but I kept watching. I immediately noticed that there was something more than just the wall. I noticed at first there was something in the wall, popping out occasionally to show me it was there. It wanted me to recognize it before it would fully come out though. It was something like watching the flat surface of a calm beach and seeing a dolphin periodically break the surface for air. When I recognized that there was definitely something living swimming through this scaffold of unbelievable shapes and colors, it came out. It was a non-human female being flying around this hyperdimensional room. She wore a flowing cape or gown that streamed directly off a big round glowing face, the kind of face that a 3-year-old kid draws, a circle with dots for eyes and a curved line for a mouth. That's all there was of her. But her face was so alive, compassionate, and enlightened. She was so happy when I realized she was there. Then I watched as a pedestal literally grew out of the floor of this room, made of the same unearthly super brilliant scaffolding. My attention must have been distracted by this thing growing out of the ground because the female being got in my face and communicated to me, not in words, "Look at what's on the pedestal." I looked up and saw a diamond-shaped object that was made of similar stuff to the walls, but infinitely more brilliant, more dazzling, more unspeakably awesome. And as my smile grew and total awe and amazement filled me, this female being began flying around the object at great speed, keeping her eyes fixed on me. She was doing flips and sharp turns and cheering as though she was celebrating the fact that she had the chance to show me. She kept communicating to me, "Look at it. Look at it. Isn't this awesome?" This continued, and I kept my eyes on that unbelievable object as the scene began to fade. I became aware of my hands folded in my lap, slightly sweaty. My body was on and up and full of energy as my mind began to return to the reality of sitting in a forest setting next to the person who had just initiated me into yet another, but easily the most awesome, dimension of conscious reality. I was left feeling unusually happy for at least a week after that experience. It has also left me with a profound sense of fulfillment and far greater purpose and perspective in my life's quest to understand the nature of this human existence. From these experiences, I have to say DMT is quite patently the most accessible of the deep psychedelic states, and in terms of the practical, empirical analysis of one's own shamanic journeys, this is by far the easiest landscape to traverse that I have encountered. Mushrooms require a huge amount of dedication and spiritual preparation, weeks and months for the most rewarding outcomes, massive amounts of attention, and a great deal of energy to keep myself at least partly detached from the emotional roller coasters that the mushroom state can draw me into, particularly because of the extended time of the trips. Same goes for powerful acid trips and other indole hallucinogens. I say this not because DMT is so short-acting, but because on a proper dose of DMT, one's being is thrust into a peak experience. There is no choice in the matter. On mushrooms or acid one must guide his or her own thoughts and emotions through precarious unknown landscapes, and even then a peak experience is not guaranteed. DMT, however, seems to serve a peak experience on a platter with a salad on the side. I knew from the moment I started toking, to when I found myself in another dimensional room, I knew this was right. That DMT wanted me there, and took me there. All I had to do was receive it graciously.